All right, I'm John Gordon. I'm here with Tim Ferriss. Tim, we're going to talk about your incredible book, new book, Tools of Titans. Really excited about this book. I love it. I'm getting a lot of great information from it already. But before we get into that, I really want to talk to you about just a little bit about you. I want to really have people who may not know you, because a lot of my people who maybe read my books, follow me, may not know a lot about you. Would love
Sure.
to share a little bit about yourself. So I know you're from Long Island, but where are you in where are you from Long Island? Because I'm from Long Island as well.
Sure. I was born in Southampton Hospital, and then I was raised as a townie in the Hamptons. So I actually grew up just outside of the village of East Hampton, and that is a weird place to grow up. I mean, there's a very sharp contrast between the haves and the have-nots, which is true of any kind of resort town that you could possibly imagine. But that is where I grew up. So I grew up going to public school on Eastern Long Island.
So what was that like for you growing up there?
It was you get to see the best and the worst of human nature, I think, when you have massive influxes from Manhattan. So I worked as a cleaner in an ice cream shop, and then as a busboy in a lot of restaurants. And you could see a big difference between, say, the self-made folks like Billy Joel. So Billy Joel was fantastic. He actually came in, and I was, I don't know, 13, 14, and I served him coffee.
Wow.
I think it was Sunday. You come in, read the paper, have a coffee, and tip $20, which to me at the time was like winning Powerball. It was just incredible. So that made a huge impression on me. And he was also very willing to talk. He was not standoffish. But then you had a lot of kind of entitled folks who were either looking to see and be seen in the Hamptons, or who were not self-made, was just part of the Lucky Sperm Club, or
Right.
had married into money. And very often, not always, but you saw some really abhorrent behavior. And I just remember thinking to myself, if I ever make it, if I'm ever successful and can find my way, that I want to be more like the former and not like the latter. So I do remember thinking pretty early on that money just seems to make you more of what you already are. It doesn't solve all your problems, and it just exaggerates a lot of your characteristics. So you want to work on that stuff en route to whatever you think your ultimate goals might be. Because if you get there and you haven't dealt with that stuff, it's going to be too late. You want to work on all of those different aspects of yourself along the way.
I love that. Now that you've made it, New York Times bestseller, have you met Billy Joel since you've made it?
I haven't. I haven't. I would love to thank him. And also I'd love to thank I don't remember his last name, but Gavin, who was the waiter who actually broke protocol and let me bring the coffee to Billy Joel, because he knew it would mean a lot to me. That was above my pay grade at the time. I was supposed to be picking up the empty coffee cup, but not originally delivering the coffee. So I owe him a big thank you as well. But I haven't seen Billy since I was, wow, whatever that was, 13, 14, maybe 15. It was earlier. It was 13,
We have
14,
to.
yeah.
I am going to make it a mission to try to make that happen. He is.
All right.
He's one of my heroes. I grew up in Smithtown, Long Island.
Yeah.
And so,
Oh, yeah.
Very, lower middle class. Dad was a New York City police officer, but as a kid, Billy Joel was it. So.
Oh yeah, Smithtown. We used to go up to the mall in Smithtown. We'd drive out because we couldn't afford anything that was being sold in the Hamptons, so we'd drive to Smithtown to do our shopping. I remember that.
So, so now that you live in the West Coast, do you still consider yourself a New Yorker?
I do. I feel like I'm split between two worlds. I'm kind of a mudblood between the Long Island kid, the Strong Island kid, and
Strong
then
Island.
the Strong Island kid, and then the I suppose San Franciscan at this point. I've been there for close to 17 years, or at least in the Bay Area. So I feel like I have a combination of both. And it's nice to spend time on the East Coast. I spend a few months of the year in New York, and then I spend maybe 6 months of the year in San Francisco, and then the rest traveling around doing whatever I happen to be doing at the time. So I think in certain respects, I'm definitely more New York, a certain degree of impatience, fast walking, fast eating. That's hard to get rid of. And then I think I've just tempered that a little bit with a slightly different pace, slightly different perspective of all the crazy people in San Francisco that I count myself among. So I would say it's a bit of both, but you never can quite get the Long Island out of the kid, I think.
I was going to ask you that. Do you think it influenced you at all? Because there's something about New Yorkers, at Long Island especially, a lot of them become comedians, a lot of successful people from Long Island. Is there something about us where, we're hard drivers, we're willing to just be bold? Is there something about Long Island that influenced you to be who you are? Was it your environment, would you say, a little bit, or
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of that. It's hard to attribute it to any one thing.
Yeah.
I think that what I've come to appreciate about New Yorkers that it used to bother me quite a bit, but it's just how brusque and curt and blunt New Yorkers can be. I actually find refreshing now a lot of the time, because and I love, for instance, Los Angeles. I've spent a ton of time in LA. Weather's fantastic. There's some great people, but there's also a lot of acting, even if the people you meet are not actors.
Right.
And so you have to peel back the onion over meeting someone 5 times to figure out what they actually want from you or what their motives are. Whereas in New York, I mean, in 15 seconds, forget about 4 meetings. It's very, very clear. And I've come to appreciate that about the East Coast and New York. Certainly, I think there are a lot of places on the East Coast that share that characteristic. I think Massachusetts and Boston certainly stands out. I have a lot of friends there. They're not known for their subtlety either.
No, yeah. I have an Uncle Louie. He is as real as it gets. So you always get that nice dose of reality.
Everyone needs their own Uncle Louie. You need someone to keep it real.
So when I work with sports teams, I love to have each member of a team share their defining moment. When you learn someone's defining moment, you get to really know them a whole lot better. You know part of their story. I was wondering what was one of your defining moments in your life, and how did that influence you?
There have been a lot. I think the whole experience with Billy Joel really had an impact on me, a lasting impact. My first time overseas had a huge impact on me. So my first real trip outside of the United States was after I transferred at the recommendation of teachers, mostly from a pretty bad public school system at the time. It's much better now, but a pretty bad public school system on Eastern Long Island to a school called St. Paul's in New Hampshire. And that was a huge change of scenery in a lot of ways. I mean, it was sink or swim and very tough. It was school 6 days a week. It was from mandatory chapel in the mornings and mandatory sports. Your school day would start around 8:30 and end around 6 p.m. You had classes after sports. And I found it very, very tough in the beginning, but ultimately had the chance to go to Japan as an exchange student. And I decided to do that, which was really a shock to the system. And I remember for the first 3 months, I kept on waking up and going, I'm in Japan. Like I couldn't process the fact that I was in Japan. And that experience in Japan showed me how many of the rules that we follow and the conventions and the reality that we experience, just as an example in the United States, are completely arbitrary. So driving on one side of the street instead of the other. Someone just decided that's the way they were going to do it. Or let's say in Mr. Baseball is actually a great movie for learning a lot about Japanese culture. But let's say taking a shower and washing with soap before you get into the bathtub. Something like that.
Right.
All these cultural differences, using chopsticks instead of knife and fork, or whatever it might be. There were so many seemingly odd things in Japan that I realized from their eyes were really, really odd on our side as well. So They looked at the idea of eating, for instance, an apple with the skin on is just unbelievable to them. They think that's ludicrous. And to really being exposed to how negotiable our reality is that we experience day to day, and how many of the things we take as unchangeable are actually right there for the testing and stress testing, really opened my mind to a lot of possibilities that I hadn't even seen. And it was right in front of me the whole time, but I'd only grown up with this experience in the U.S. And I never knew anything different, so I never thought that they could be different.
Right.
So that was a huge formative experience for me.
Did you learn the language?
I did, yeah. It was really tough. I wanted to come home at one point because I was finding it so difficult. I was put into a Japanese school, and by that I don't mean a Japanese language school. I mean I was put in a school uniform and put into a Japanese high school with 5,000 Japanese kids. I was the only white American head in the class photo.
Wow.
And I took physics, world history, everything in Japanese. So I got my ass handed to me for a very long time, but eventually figured out, mostly using judo textbooks. That was my sport that I played.
Wow.
Judo textbooks and comic books, learned the language with a lot of help, certainly from my classmates especially, and just had a blast. So that's certainly a place I've fallen in love with. And you hear a lot about how the Japanese are xenophobic and they don't like foreigners and all this stuff. And I think a lot of that can just be attributed to their general lack of English ability. If you learn Japanese, the whole world opens up. And so I think that's also something I realized, is that you shouldn't attribute to, and I've heard this is a phrasing that I'm borrowing, but don't attribute to malice that can be explained through other means. Don't assume they're being racist or standoffish. Maybe they're just nervous about their English, which 99% of the time is the case. So it's been an experience that is a gift that keeps on giving for me. And I'm going back to Japan in a couple months. I'm still actually in touch with my host family from when I was 15. So,
oh, that's awesome. That's great. My son and I actually heard you talk about a little bit of your Japan experience, and you actually spoke a few words. And I want to credit you. After that, he went and we bought the software for him to start to learn how to speak Japan.
Cool.
He loves the Japanese culture. He wants to go live there after college. And so he's 16 right now, and he just loves the culture. He's really big into anime. Are you familiar with anime?
Oh, very familiar. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he's so involved in that. He's reading the novels now that are affecting his schoolwork at school. So
Well, I got to tell you, I think that a little bit of time in Japan can go a long way, especially if he's going to take the time to tackle the language, so that he's interacting with mostly Japanese people and not expat English speakers. I think it's a fantastic experience.
So hearing you talk about that, that's like a fearless experience. For you to do that, I mean, that is saying, you know what, I'm just going to go to an entire different country and learn the language, immerse myself. I mean, is that where your fearlessness was really born? Because you're known for doing fearless things. Is that where it started?
Well, I think that I would say that I have become better at putting my fears under a microscope. I wouldn't say I'm fearless. I think I am better at fear analysis. So I'm also sometimes thought of as a risk taker, a guy who has a high risk tolerance. Right. I don't view myself that way. I view myself as someone who's good at risk mitigation in all things, and actually pretty conservative. So not politically, just in general, life, financial, right. Everything. I view myself as pretty conservative. And the reason I say that is that, and there's an exercise I do regularly that might be helpful for folks. Yeah. So, and it can create the illusion of being fearless, but really all it is becoming more familiar with your fears. And what I mean by that is a lot of folks, including myself, have goal-setting exercises and resolutions. But the flip side of that, the emergency brake that prevents those things from happening, is generally a fear or a set of fears or perceived risk. So what do? In my case, I do an exercise called fear setting, and it's covered at length in Tools of Titans, but I'll give you the nutshell version. So the nutshell version, and I schedule this. I will do this whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, or at least say once a quarter, but more frequently once a month or so, is I'll take a piece of paper and I will create 3 columns. So I'll show you what that looks like since we have some video. But in effect, you're taking like an 8.5 by 12, or that's not 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and you're making 2 vertical lines that cut the page into thirds like that. Okay. And then on the top of that page, you will write down the decision you're considering. Maybe that's starting a company, leaving a job, ending a relationship, starting a relationship. Who knows what it is? Something you've been putting off, but considering. And in the first column, you write down all of the worst things that could happen if you do what you're considering doing. Right. And the key is to make it specific. So you have all these bullets on the left-hand column. Then in the middle column, you write for each of those what you could do to minimize the likelihood of it happening, those bad things. Then in the last column, you write for each bullet what you could do to get back to where you are now if everything went sideways and the worst case happened. And maybe getting back to where you are now takes a month, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year, who knows? But you run through this fear setting exercise, and then you look at on a 0 to 10 scale of impact, the potential positive upside and the potential negative downside. And what you find for a lot of these things you're considering is that the potential upside, if things even go moderately right, is a 9 or a 10 in impact, in life-changing magnitude, positive. And then the negative is a unlikely 2 to 3 negative impact that is temporary and reversible. And as soon as you look at it that way, you're like, okay, well, wait a second. This thing that was very unclear and cloudy and nebulous that was preventing me from taking action, now that I've actually put it under a microscope, it's like someone came to me and said, okay, here's a 6-sided die. We're going to roll this. And if it's a 1, you pay me $1. But if it's anything else, I pay you $1. It's like, okay, yeah, you'll take that bet all day long. And it becomes easier to make these decisions and also to view these different decisions and projects as experiments. That's why I tend to view my life as 6-month projects and 2-week experiments. Because I don't fall prey to the cognitive bias of being committed to this decision that is a permanent, lifelong decision. No, it's not a permanent, lifelong decision. Try it for 2 weeks, tweak as needed, abandon if that's the right decision, and move on. So I think that's another way that I tend to look at the world, and why, for instance, the slow carb diet in the 4-Hour Body and in Tools of Titans has been so successful. It's why people lose 160, 180, 200 pounds in some cases, because in that case, I'm always trying to maximize the adherence to the diet first, meaning will people actually do it? Second, the effectiveness, does it work? And then the efficiency last, like how well you do something. And in the case of, say, slow carb, it's 6 days on, 1 day off. So 1 day a week, you have cheat day. You go nuts. Look, I love cheesecake. I have cheesecake in the refrigerator at home right now. And my cheat day is, well, I've moved it forward a little bit because I've had a really good week. So my cheat day is effectively tonight. So I'm going to have cheesecake. I'm going to have ice cream. It's going to be great. And then I'm back on the wagon tomorrow. And so it's but the point being that this experimental mindset can be applied to just about everything, whether it's diet, whether it's a entrepreneurial venture that you want to test on, say, the evenings and weekends before you quit your job so that you have some inbound cash flow that can cover your primary bills first. All these things can be viewed as 2-week experiments to start with.
I love that. People think that, when you have a lot of success, you actually have less fear. I have found that really successful people actually have more fear because they have more to lose. I was wondering what makes you fearful. I know what makes me fearful, but what makes you fearful, on this journey we call life?
Yeah. For me, I think that it's definitely true. A lot of people become they develop extreme loss aversion when they become what they consider successful. They become very defensive. So what made them successful, which is going on the offense, then becomes defense, and it can be problematic on a bunch of levels. I mean, you have to be smart and look at asset protection and estate planning and so on. You don't want to neglect that. But what I would say for me, the thing that really frightens me, or that I'm paying a lot of attention to, is cognitive decline. I have Alzheimer's and Parkinson's on both sides of my family. So I'm spending a lot of time with scientists and looking at research related to preventing the onset of, or even reversing the symptoms of, say, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. So that's where I'm paying a lot of attention. And I've had some involvement with a number of nonprofits and research groups that are looking into these things. So that's where I'm spending a lot of time. That's really the only, slowly losing my mind, that or watching my parents have a slow descent into dementia, that terrifies me. So I'm jumping into the fray to do something about it. We'll see where the cards fall.
I love it. You're confronting your fears, and that's powerful.
Doing my best.
Yeah.
Starts with going out and finding the people who know what the hell they're talking about.
Right. Right. Do you ever get fearful before a talk or anything like that?
Oh, I'm nervous before every talk.
Really?
I've done hundreds of talks now, and before every talk, I still have headphones in, listening to music, pacing around like a caged animal. Don't want to talk to people for a few minutes beforehand. I mean, I'm not antisocial. I'm just I have to do my thing in my own head. I'm sorry. And I'm actually very introverted. I need a lot of alone time to recharge. So doing public events is really draining for me. I enjoy the impact that they can have. And I do enjoy interacting with people who have read the books or are simply interested in engaging in discussions about topics I care about. But I'm nervous before every talk. I wrote a blog post. I think it's called How I Prepare for Every Public Keynote or something like that. And I talk about how I prepare. But it made me feel better to learn at one point that Dean Martin, who is, of course, right up there with Sinatra for a long time. As rumor has it, he used to vomit before every performance. He was so nervous that he would vomit before every performance. Mike Tyson, very similar. Super nervous before every fight. Iron Mike at his peak. I mean, the guy was undefeatable. And he was extremely nervous before every fight. And certainly I'm not of their caliber, but before every public speech that I gave, my hands are sweating. I'm pacing around. I'm afraid I'm going to forget everything that I've been trying to remember to touch on every single time without fail. So
you're of their caliber in this world, just so you know. You won't say it because you're humble, but I'll say it. And that goes right to what I want to talk about now. I want to talk about the podcast before we get into the book, because, I mean, it's the top podcast in the world. Millions of people love it like I do. There's one, though, that really stood out to me that I love more than others. The Jamie Foxx interview.
Sure.
I mean,
Jamie's amazing.
That interview, I mean, just blew my mind. I was driving down with my family. We were going for a 3-hour drive, and we listened to that. So you had me, my wife, and then you had 2 teenage kids, like, you know, at the edge of our seats, listening, laughing, like, whoa. So big question on that. What were you thinking going into it? Like, I mean, all right, I'm interviewing Jamie Foxx. What were you thinking going into it? And then as it was going on, as it was happening, did you know it was going to be as good as it was at the end product?
Well, so it took about a year, maybe a year and a half to set up that interview. Okay. It took a long time.
Wow.
And a mutual friend, or I should say a fan of mine who became a friend, knew Jamie and knows Jamie really well. And he was playing go-between, and it took a long time to set up. So that's worth noting to start with. Yeah. And then in preparation, I mean, I did a lot of homework. And much like with Arnold Schwarzenegger, I was really nervous before both of those. I didn't want to screw it up. I wanted to do my homework. I wanted it to be better than other interviews they'd experienced. So I didn't sleep very much prior to either of those, and had my notes all laid out and certain portions highlighted that I knew I wanted to try to hit. And with Jamie, though, man, I mean, he exceeds all expectations. So as soon as we got started, this was in his studio at his house where he records music, and a few things came to mind. So really, I knew that he was just knocking it out of the park right away. And of course, later it was voted podcast episode of the year for 2015 and
of the century.
I mean, I knew that he was just knocking it out of the park on every possible level. And what I kept on saying to myself in my head was not, oh my God, this is the best podcast I will ever publish. It was, oh my God, I hope my equipment is working. Oh my God, I hope my audio is working. I was so petrified at the chance that I would just be losing this gold, that there would be some type of audio mishap.
I feel that way right now, just so you know. I feel that way right now. So it was just a phenomenal experience. And Jamie is one of those people who is as real as it gets. He is one of the most genuine, kind-hearted people I've ever seen. And I've watched him interact with all sorts of people now. And I've spent more time with him. He invited me to be on his radio show and interview me for the Foxhole. And he's one of those people, and I'm really pleased to say that for almost every person in Tools of Titans that I've had the chance to spend a lot more time with, or more time with, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tony Robbins, these are folks, Maria Popova, for instance, Amelia Boone. Yeah. The more I get to know them, the more impressed I am. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you meet heroes and they have clay feet, and you realize that they don't necessarily walk the talk, or that they're abusive to people, say, who serve them coffee, right? And you see the worst characteristics come out. And I think maybe I try to select for people who are not like that. But the folks I've had a chance to really spend time with have
exceeded my expectations, which is why, I mean, the Tools of Titans is really only about 60% of the most actionable and favorite nuggets from the podcast interviews from the Tim Ferriss show. Right. 40%, which means about 300 pages, is all new stuff that I've learned from them since the podcast. So the stuff that never appeared on in audio to begin with.
I love that. So if you're a listener to the podcast, know that when you read the book, you're getting a lot more information that's not on the podcast. Tons.
Yeah. I mean, probably 400 pages of brand new stuff.
So 3 people,
because you have like my commentary and my experimentation as well. Because if it made it in the book, then I've vetted it and used it myself, as well as imposed it on my friends and had them test everything.
So you test things. How do you decide whether you're going to keep on using it in your life? Because you can't use every strategy, right?
No. You know, it's. I'm not going to curse, but I'll give you a sanitized version. So Cal Fussman, who was the principal writer of the What I Learned column in Esquire for 20 plus years. So he interviewed Mikhail Gorbachev, Muhammad Ali, everybody you can imagine. And he was told by a novelist named Harry Dent at one point, the good stuff sticks. Now, he didn't say stuff, but we'll use stuff. The good stuff sticks, meaning the things that really have an impact, they tend to give you so much positive feedback. And in terms of results, whether that's lowering anxiety, improving your effectiveness, whatever it might be, the results are so clear that you can't help but continue to practice them in a sense. So it's really just what sticks. And the good news is there's a lot to play with. And so you can try, I recommend people go on the so-and-so diet for a week, right? So if you are trying to test a few things in your own life, it's like, okay, go on the Jamie Foxx diet and like read your favorite short story from him for inspiration in the morning, and then do 1 or 2 things that he does for that week. And maybe it's his sort of pull-up and push-up workout, and you do that 2 or 3 times a week. Right. And that's fine. You don't want to try to boil the ocean and do 50 things at once. So just start small, test small, and then, as Bruce Lee would say, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what is uniquely your own, and then you're off to the races.
Love that. 3 people that you haven't had on your podcast yet that you would like to have, that you'd like to interview. Top 3.
Top 3. I would say the first 3 who come to mind would be Neil Gaiman, who's just an incredible fiction writer, whose work I've loved for at least a decade now. And became known for a graphic novel series called Sandman, which is incredible, and has gone on to just write fantastic novels and do audiobooks and so on. Then I would say Oprah, because she's endlessly fascinating to me, and just where she started and where she ended up is so unbelievable as a story. I'd love to talk to her about some of her most important and difficult decisions. Number 3, again, just off the top of my head is maybe they're a tie, but Condoleezza Rice and Tina Fey, I think, would both be super, super fascinating. There's a long list, though. There's no shortage of amazing people to talk to in this world, but those are a few that come to mind right away.
I met Condoleezza at the 49ers practice. I had worked with the team, and she was there watching practice, got a chance to talk to her. She watches film like every day.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a huge football fan. So
she knows her stuff. She's no joke.
So impressive. I wish she would run for president. We won't get into that though. All right. So now, one last question on the podcast. I would love to know, you've done so many interviews. You're putting these things to the test, these ideas, these strategies to the test. But how have you grown in it? In this journey, in this process.
Yeah, I've learned so much from my guests that I use on a daily basis. It's really hard to even know where to begin. I've also really just made a study of asking questions, and I think when you study questions, there are many ways to do this. I mean, a number of chapters in Tools of Titans are dedicated to asking better questions, both of yourself and other people, because I think that's the core of good thinking. But I have changed my morning routines. I listened to specific guided meditations that certain guests have listened to, like the 2010 Summer Smile Meditation by Tara Brach. If I'm having a very challenging week, I will listen to that in the mornings. And I started doing hot and cold exposure along the lines of Wim Hof and Rick Rubin, legendary music producer. Devices like the Chili Pad for dramatically changing sleep quality, improving sleep quality, have just been game changers. You have different types of sort of physical therapeutic tools like the Rumble Roller, which Amelia Boone, who's the most successful obstacle racer in the world, recommended to me. I mean, these are things literally, I landed in New York. I don't live in New York City. And one of the first things I did was go out and buy a Rumble Roller at REI and bring it back to the house. And then I created my stash of exogenous ketones, which are these sort of powdered alternate energy sources that Dominic D'Agostino taught me about. So I have that on tap for mornings when I might not have time for breakfast. And the list just goes on and on and on. So it's there's not a single guest in Tools of Titans who did not meaningfully impact my life in some way.
So being a lifelong learner has helped you become a better person. And grow in many ways.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you stop learning, you're at least on some level, I think, dead. You're either growing or you're either getting stronger or you're getting weaker. There's no in between. So
I love that. All right, so now let's talk about the book.
Yeah.
Why we're here, and did you enjoy writing it? I mean, because writing can be challenging. Did you enjoy the process of writing this book?
Yeah, writing is torturous for me. This is the first book that I've enjoyed writing.
Wow.
So that's saying a lot. Yeah. And it seems to have translated to the reader experience, which has been super fun to see. And I love putting it together because I got to review and refine and distill and then re-review all of my favorite lessons and takeaways and tools and technologies and gadgets and all of this stuff that I wanted to put into a Cliff Notes for myself. I mean, that was the intention. I never planned on writing this book. Yeah, maybe that's part of the reason that I had fun writing it, is that I was putting it together for myself. And then it got to a point where I was like, all right, who am I kidding? Like, this thing's already a book. I might as well just share it with readers and listeners. But I was putting it together for myself. That's it. And it was a blast. It was a blast, and it's been fun to see. Right now, I think on Amazon there are 400 or 450 reviews, 87% 5-star. I mean, people are really enjoying it, and this is, I think, another lesson that I learned through a lot of the interviews that I've done is that you have to get good, and this is a hard lesson for me to learn, and I've had to relearn it many times. You have to get good at practicing celebrating the little things and the small things, because if you don't develop that skill with the little things, you will never be able to exercise that skill with the big things. Wow. And what was very cool in a meta sense, that these types of philosophies and lessons, since I was reviewing them while I was writing, helped the actual writing process. So go figure. Yeah, it's been a really unique ride for me so far.
So to write an epic book like this, I mean, it's a big book. I mean, it's big.
It is.
There's a lot of writing. What's one thing that you could sort of dissect that you did in the writing process that might help a writer write their book?
Yeah. Well, the first is scratch your own itch. For nonfiction, right. Scratch your own itch. Okay. I mean, write it for yourself and for one or two close friends who you want to help. Don't try to write for everyone. And that was actually a lesson that was reiterated for me by Maria Popova, who runs Brain Pickings, but she quoted Kurt Vonnegut on this as well. Write to please one person. And that can be you or it can be one of your close friends, but it has to be clear. And so I always try to scratch my own itch. And the second would be that in terms of writing process, paying attention to the physical routine you have, and particularly in the first 60 minutes of each morning, having that on autopilot as a boot up process or a boot up sequence is really important to try to optimize your state for the day. And this was really emphasized by Tony Robbins. He has a state priming routine he has in the morning. Part of it is a dip in a cold plunge. So for instance, I started doing 60-second minimum ice cold showers first thing in the morning. Wake up, I do some mindfulness practice or meditation, and that could be certain types of exercise. It could be using an app like Headspace. It could be, like I mentioned, the guided meditations, and then immediately going to light up my nervous system with 60-second minimum ice cold shower. And Tony Robbins really outlined for me why this was important. And he said a lot of people try in a lowered energy state or a negative state to think of strategies to, say, solve a sticking point in a book or to address a problem or a challenge that they have. And he said that's not the right approach, because you're only going to see problems when you're in that state.
Right.
You have to go from optimizing your state to then finding an enabling story, and then only then going after strategy. So at the top of my morning journal, I actually have, across many pages, it says state, story, strategy, state, story, strategy, to remind me, like, if you are in a tired state, a depressive state, an anxious state, first thing you need to do is change your physiology. And so I would use different tools for that. I would use the exogenous ketones, let's say, as a very light breakfast. I would use maybe what I call titanium tea, which is this concoction of pu'er tea, green tea, and then at the tail end, like some turmeric and coconut oil. Right. There are a bunch of different ways to do it. The cold exposure, certainly, to get me into a at least 10 or 20% elevated state before I sat down to try to tackle the day. And there are different exercises you can do to also aid with that, but Wim Hof breathing, very helpful at the same time. So those are a few of the things that I would say writers should pay attention to, for sure. And if you're a writer, there are also some, I'll recommend one book that is great, because it helps the neurotic, crazy person inside all of us when you're having your moments of doubt. There's a book called Bird by Bird. If you're a writer, that book can be just a lifesaver. I have friends who almost handed back their advances and quit their books, and they read Bird by Bird, continued on, and then had New York Times bestsellers.
That's awesome. Did you read Stephen King's On Writing? Did you read that book?
I did. I read it a long time ago. I'd like to go back and reread it, actually.
I should too, because I read it a while ago, and he said writers write, and I just love that. So the cold shower, the cold plunge, that really worked.
Oh, huge difference. Yeah, absolutely. And this is something I came up with at least a half a dozen people. And so I've tried to focus on, whenever possible, hot, cold. They call it contrast therapy. The East Germans used it very, very effectively way back in the day, and then really developed it as a scientific recovery protocol. But you can improve sleep. You can improve muscular recovery. You can improve all sorts of things by using hot and cold in interesting ways. So, for instance, tonight I've had a very long couple of weeks, man. It's been really, really busy. But one of the things that has kept me afloat is going to the Russian baths. And so I'll go to the Russian baths, and I'll do hot, cold plunge, hot, cold plunge. And after 5 or 6 cycles of that, as Rick Rubin would say, nothing in the world bothers you. Nothing in the world bothers you after that. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Also helps with fat loss, so that's a plus.
Yeah, big plus. So the fact that we talked about, I mean, it is a big book. I love that you went there with this, because in a world of short tweets and short attention spans, this is something that's epic, iconic. Would you say that was that intentional? Because it is counterintuitive to say we're going big, but was it intentional?
My books are as long as they have to be. So this book was, to keep in mind, I mean, I'm pulling the best of the best. Like 60% of it is the best of the best from more than 10,000 pages of transcripts.
Right.
So getting that down to about 350 pages was a huge distillation to start with. And then so you look at this book. What's also important to realize is you can think of it like a cookbook or a choose your own adventure book. And growing up, I actually knew the creator of the Choose Your Own Adventure book series. He would test his book. He would test his books on me and my brother, which is hilarious. So as a reward, this is total transgression or digression, but he would say, I will put your names in the books as a thank you. So in some of the really old Choose Your Own Adventure books, you will see Tim Ferriss in there. Like Tim Ferriss was being chased by a Tyrannosaurus and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what? So that's from me test driving these books when I was 9 or 10. But the point I was going to make is that it's a big book, but it's intended to be consumed as a dip in and dip out, 5 to 10 pages at a time cookbook. So you decide what you want to work on. And the book's broken into the healthy, wealthy, and wise sections. You're like, okay, I need some inspiration, or I need some tactics, or I need some tools with health, or wealth, finances, or wise. I really need to appreciate what I have. I need to be better at not just the goal-setting type A portion of life, but the actual enjoyment of life. Okay, well, let's flip to wise and grab a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, whatever, and sit down for 10 to 15 minutes. And by the end of it, like, you will have something you can use. So it's intended to be consumed in very, very bite-sized portions. It's more of a reference book, and I really wanted it to be relevant 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So it's intended to last.
And it will be, because I mean, that's how I've been reading it. Just, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, and you get something for every part of the book that you read. So I love it. All right, so say you're not the author of this book, but you buy it online. You buy 5 copies.
Okay.
Who would you give this book to? 5 people, like 5 different people that you give this book to, and like why? Because I mean, people are buying. I follow you on Twitter. I'm seeing 20, 30 copies. Hey, I'm buying these copies for everyone I know. So I was thinking, okay, if Tim had to give these books out, who would he give them to? 5 books.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure they've already ordered copies, but I will be giving copies to my family.
Okay.
I mean, because this is basically my reference book, meaning not I wrote it, but like the notebook I put together for myself, right? So I want my parents to be around for a long time, and I would love for them to read, especially the healthy section, and I think the wise section is an area where I spend a lot of time reviewing personally, because I'm sometimes very good at being, and this is not something to be proud of, but being stuck in the future in planning mode. So I always love thinking about the next big thing, but if you're always, as I think it was Lao Tzu who said this, that being stuck in the past is depression, being stuck in the future is anxiety, and happiness is being in the present. Well, you can't always be in the present moment, or you wouldn't be able to plan anything or do your taxes or whatever. But I would love my parents to get as much out of the healthy and wise sections as I have myself. I have a younger brother. I think he has some amazing things ahead of him, but he'll need to make some tough decisions, as we all do. And I would love for some of all the sections to help him with some of those decisions. And so that gives me 2 more books. I would probably. What
about an entrepreneur? Like an entrepreneur, how would they use this book?
Oh, well, they could use it a million ways from Sunday, because you have. Luckily, I mean, for me, living in Silicon Valley and having been so involved with tech investing over the last almost 10 years, I've gotten to know some of the CEOs and founders of the fastest growing companies in history, literally. And I would have them look at, say, the chapters with billionaires like Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, Chris Sacca. I mean, there are playbooks for all of these people, and they talk about the early days. That's important. So I think that whenever I'm giving this to, say, entrepreneurs, that I would suggest they study how people got to where they are, not necessarily what they're always doing today. Because what you do once you have $1 billion can be very different from what you did when you were scrapping really hard as a 30-year-old trying to make your way and find your footing. So those types of early day lessons learned stories can be super instructive, as well as the rules that they use for choosing projects or saying no to projects. Derek Sivers' chapter, I think, is really good for that. Seth Godin's chapter, really good for that. So I would point them to the wealthy. So yeah, maybe I would take a copy and I would give it to a would-be entrepreneur, or someone who is looking to kind of reinvent themselves from an entrepreneurship standpoint. And then the last one I think I'd give to, I try to find maybe a 9th grader who was very high promise, but maybe screwing up a little, and maybe not surrounding themselves with the best of influences. And I would give them a copy, because I think 9th, 10th grade, that's a really, really critical window within which a lot of kids make seemingly small decisions that have a huge impact on the rest of their lives. So yeah, I'd probably do that. I'm going to be doing a lot. I can't talk about it just yet, but I'll be doing a lot with promising students around the country in the next few months, which is going to be super, super exciting. So that's why, as number 5, I would say I would give a book to like a kid who doesn't realize her or his promise, like what they could actually achieve. They're not thinking big enough, and maybe they're being steered in a bad direction or leaning in a bad direction that they don't realize will have long-term consequences. And I'd be like, okay, let's talk. Here's a book. This is your homework assignment. And like, I will help you, but you have to digest this, at least part of it. And that'd be number 5. I would enjoy that. I always thought I was going to be a 9th grade teacher, man, for ages.
Really?
And, because I had some fantastic, really important influences and mentors around that period, 9th and 10th grade, that changed my life forever. So I always thought I was going to go back and teach 9th grade. Just turned out I'm still a teacher.
You are.
I'm just doing it through books and podcasts and conversations like this.
Yeah, and I love that you're saying that, because I was thinking with this book that, a teenager, someone in high school, you give this book, you have now all these teachers, all these mentors that are at your fingertips. Yeah, you listen to your podcast, you can hear all these teachers. There's no excuse not to learn anymore. It's all right there.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff out there, and it can be overwhelming, right? I mean, the amount can be overwhelming, but there's so much good stuff. I mean, I think hardcore history, for instance, as a podcast, which is long. I mean, these episodes are 4 hours, 5 hours long. Right. But everyone is like, every single episode is like the best audiobook you've ever heard on some historical event. And I was never into history. I always found the history that I'd been taught, the way it was taught, generally pretty dry and boring. But if you listen to his series Wrath of the Khans about Genghis Khan, or you listen to Ghost of the Ostfront or any of these, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you will just listen to it all the time. And it's that rare combination of, I think, actionable or fascinating detail and entertainment that is really, really promising and makes me optimistic, especially when you have people who are doing long form, where you can get into the details, you can get into the nitty gritty, because that stuff matters. The little things oftentimes are the big things. They're not just these passing details.
I love that. The little things are the big things. All right, so I got a few more questions. And Tim, I just want to say I really am honored that you took the time to do this with me. It really means a lot. I'm a huge fan. I've admired you from afar for a long time. So thank you. Thanks for
having me on, man. My pleasure entirely.
I want to close with a few questions though. And you talked about not being in the future too much, but we have a thing called BFG. But big fun goal. Big fun goal. What's one of your big fun goals for this coming year that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, so I would say this is going to be a little weird sounding, but it would be to, and very subjective, but I would like to be one of, say, the top 50 bases. I'm going to explain what that means in the U.S. for acro yoga. So acro yoga is like partner acrobatics, and it's really just incredibly fun. There's a whole chapter in the book about it because it's been so much fun for me, and my hips and legs and back have never been healthier. I mean, it's really amazing. At 39, my lower back, hips, and everything feel better than they did when I was 25, 20. And a base is someone who holds other people up on their feet and like spins them around, does all this crazy stuff. So even though I'm not an ideal body type for that. Usually the guys who are really good at that, not surprising, are big, strong dudes with really long legs, or giants. These guys are 6'4", 6'5". I'm not. I'm 5'9" on a really good day.
Me too.
I would like to be at a very high level as a base in acro yoga. Other goals, I've already blocked out on my calendar I think it's an 18-day kayaking trip in the Grand Canyon, and I'm going with a friend of mine who formerly was one of the world's top competitive kayakers. Oh, wow. I'm afraid of kayaking because I tried to learn kayaking at one point in Argentina, where the safety standards are a little lax, should we say, and I got flipped over and I couldn't flip back over. I thought I was going to drown, and I got just like dragged across the bottom of this riverbed, and it was terrifying. So that is a big fun goal. My buddies will keep me safe. These guys are actually the best of the best, some of the best. So that's a big fun goal. And I'm sure there are many others, but those are the first two that come to mind.
So if you can invent anything, what would you invent?
Ooh.
I've never asked that of anyone, by the way. That just came to me for this. I mean, I was thinking of some great questions for you, and I thought that's something I'd like to know from him. What would he invent?
Let's try it. I would invent, and this won't have time to go too deep into, but I would invent, if I could invent anything, I guess it would have to be software or some that would address the control problem related to generalized artificial intelligence. So to prevent, as some people have called it, or at least control the summoning of the demon, meaning a generalized intelligence that is 1,000, a million, a billion times, that can do a billion hours of, say, human intellectual work in the fraction of, or the span of a few seconds,
Right.
something like that. Something that will exceed our capacity by orders of magnitude that we can't even currently imagine, or at least most people can't imagine. The control problem being ensuring that the directives or the actions of said generalized artificial intelligence aligns with ours.
Right. Or else we have Terminator.
Hence avoiding Skynet and so on.
Right.
The first thing that comes to mind would be inventing that. I don't have the chops for it, but if we're just saying, hey,
Yeah, anything.
if you could invent anything, maybe that's what I would take a stab at.
Okay. And not such a crazy question, but, we have a thing we do called one word and, a life word. A word that would sort of define the essence of your life. If you had to put one word on your tombstone when you die, what would you want that word to be?
Student.
Student. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd use student. I was going to say teacher, but I think to be a good teacher, you have to be a student first.
I love that. I love that. Benjamin Franklin had printer on his.
Oh, nice. Yes. Ben Franklin, man. If I could bring somebody back to have lunch or dinner with, he'd be way up at the top of the list.
Yeah, I won't ask you that question, but why student? Like, why?
Well, I really feel like each of us has such incredible capacity to learn and to exceed our wildest expectations if we get better at learning. That it's not only an imperative, but it can be one of the most, if not the most enjoyable aspects of life. Continually having those aha moments and finding maybe non-obvious solutions. And they could just be non-obvious to you or to other people, to challenges, goals, and so on in your life. I think is one of the most redeeming capabilities that makes us humans. And when you start to dig into it and be playful with that, ambitious but playful, wonderful things can happen, and you can rediscover, I think, that joy that many of us feel like we left behind in childhood. And it's not only joyful, but I think that it can lead to incredible breakthroughs that can help you and the people you care for most. So being a student, or at least having the mindset of a student and being receptive and open in that way, I think could help address a lot of the challenges that we collectively have before us. Right. So that's my hope, at least.
So I'm not naturally positive. I actually go more towards the negative. I have to work really hard at being positive. How do you stay positive?
Well, there are quite a few tools, because I know I have some depressive tendencies.
Yeah, me too.
Seems to run in the family.
Yeah.
But I use a journal called the 5-Minute Journal, which helps me to exercise gratitude, forces me to exercise gratitude on a regular basis, and it's 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes at night. The cold exposure helps tremendously with this. So different types of cold exposure that I've integrated into my life. Meditation, even if it's just a few minutes, I've found to be tremendously helpful for me to maybe lessen the tendency to get caught in negative thought spirals. Yeah. Where you become your own worst enemy. When you're able to use something like, say, Headspace or Calm, these are two apps, or listen to guided meditations from Tara Brach or Sam Harris, for instance, these can help you to become more aware of your thoughts so that you catch yourself before you slip into this spiral of negativity or pessimism or paranoia even, where you're assuming people have motives that you have no proof of, really. You're just assuming the worst. And you can start to catch yourself and realize that the voice in your head isn't always your best friend and operating in your best interest. So the ability to, I think, referee that is very important. So the meditation and mindfulness practice can be super, super helpful. And then there are other things, biochemically, and I'm not a doctor, don't play one on the internet, but there are certain supplements that I found very helpful that I talk about, or a number of doctors talk about in Tools of Titans, like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, before bed, for instance, or very low dose lithium. And there's a great piece in the New York Times called, I think it's Maybe We Should All Take a Little Bit of Lithium, about lithium.
Wow.
And very low doses, though, 5 milligrams instead of, say, 1,300 or 1,500 in the case of a monotherapy used with something like bipolar disorder. And those are a few of the tools in the toolkit. But yeah, I think that that's very important for me to have those in place as a safety net, so that my downward swings aren't as deep or as long as they might be otherwise.
Can I share with you one that I do?
Sure.
Yeah, it's something that's really helped me. I started about 13, 14 years ago. I call it a thank you walk. And while I'm walking, I just practice gratitude on the walk. And the research shows when you're doing that, you're flooding your brain and your body with positive emotions and endorphins that uplift you, rather than the stress hormones that slowly drain you. Because you can't be stressed and thankful at the same time. So people often ask me, like, what do I do? Like, that's my one thing. I'm always looking for others. That's why I asked you that. But the thank you walk has been really like a game changer, a life changer for me.
Yeah, I love it. I walk a lot also. Yeah. I mean, I really try to make it a habit to walk a lot. Yeah. We've made a lot of evolutionary trade-offs to be able to walk long distances. So I feel like it's probably good to actually put that into practice. But yeah, that sounds great. I'll definitely try that.
Yep. Well, Tim, it was incredible talking to you. I really appreciate you sharing the insights, your wisdom, and just really this new great book with us. And I'm thrilled. Any last words?
I would just say to everybody listening, whether you get the book or not, I'll leave you with one thought to ponder. And this was the answer to a question that I ask almost all of my guests, which is, what would you put on a billboard? Wow. A gigantic billboard, if you could get a short message out to everybody or to millions of people. And I asked this, there are a lot of good answers to this, but I asked B.J. Miller, who is a palliative care physician. He's an MD who helps people in hospice care, and he has helped more than 1,000 people to die gracefully, people with terminal illnesses and so on. And I asked him what he would put on a billboard, and the billboard answer was, don't believe everything that you think. And that is a really powerful line to consider. And so I would encourage people to think about that and, write down, perhaps journal on the stories that you've told yourself for a long time about who you are, about what you can or can't do, about the way you've always been, about what you can never do or never change. Write these things down. Don't believe everything that you think, and try to stress test those. There are different ways you can do it, but certainly, I'm very proud of Tools of Titans. I think it's my most flexible book to date. A lot of my readers have read all my stuff. I think it's the best book so far, which makes me super happy.
It is
the first book. Yeah, thanks, man. It's the first, like I mentioned, the first book that I really enjoyed writing. Yeah, and I'm really proud of it. So I hope people check it out. But even if they don't, certainly if you go to toolsoftitans.com, you can see sample chapters. You can find you can find all the podcast episodes at 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out. And I'll leave it at that. I really wish people the best, and to remember when they can that reality is more negotiable than you think. Wow. A lot of the rules that we all follow are just a fragile collection of socially reinforced arbitrary rules that you can choose to break pretty much at any time. It is largely up to you. Yeah. So I would say for people to, when they can, try to remember that.
Reality is more negotiable than you think. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Ferriss. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much.